My friends, in times like these, it's hard to see past the insanity in a reality so uncertain and unknown. Life as we knew it forever changed, and there's no peace of mind to be found. Who can even make sense of tomorrow when our dreams keep crashing to the ground? And yet, as we rise to greet another day, and the sun is still bright in the sky, always a reason to hope for better times. Though it seems like the answer's worlds away, we've got enough, just enough to keep us going, holding on to unbroken simple faith. 'Cause the heat never breaks, and the heat never bends, and the heat never gives up in the night. Oh, it perseveres through the deepest despairs. His emunah strengthens him for the fight, and the heat understands that Hashem has a plan, and that's all it takes to make it through. His thought that loves him, that's what he holds on to. The world went dark, the crowds dispersed on the streets that were once filled with life. But a brilliant light emerged from deep inside our hearts. The shuls were shuttered and still, but our prayers rang through our homes. Instead of looking out for inspiration, we dug deep and found strengths we'd never known. And one more time, we will rise to greet another day, where every moment's more precious than ever, and life's sweetest little joys, they are the treasure. 'Cause when it feels like the answer's worlds away, more than enough to keep us going. We're holding on to unbroken simple faith. 'Cause the heat never breaks, and the heat never bends, and the heat never gives up in the night. Oh, it perseveres through the deepest despairs. His emunah strengthens him for the fight, and the heat understands that Hashem has a plan, and that's all it takes to make it through. His thought that loves him, that's what My friends, in times like these, it's hard to see past the insanity in a reality so uncertain and unknown. Life as we knew it forever changed, and there's no peace of mind to be found. Who can even make sense of tomorrow when our dreams keep crashing to the ground? And yet, as we rise to greet another day, and the sun is still bright in the sky, always a reason to hope for better times. Though it seems like the answer's worlds away, we've got enough, just enough to keep us going, holding on to unbroken simple faith. 'Cause the heat never breaks, and the heat never bends, and the heat never gives up in the night. Oh, it perseveres through the deepest despairs. His emunah strengthens him for the fight, and the heat understands that Hashem has a plan, and that's all it takes to make it through. His thought that loves him, that's what he holds on to. The world went dark, the crowds dispersed on the streets that were once filled with life. But a brilliant light emerged from deep inside our hearts. The shuls were shuttered and still, but our prayers rang through our homes. Instead of looking out for inspiration, we dug deep and found strengths we'd never known. And one more time, we will rise to greet another day, where every moment
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm not sure if you noticed or were listening to the lyrics of the song that was playing as you were signing on, but it's so relevant to the times that we're living in today. And I just want to quote, it's Benny Friedman's song. And can't leave this unsaid. His chorus goes like this: because a Yid, a Jew, never breaks, and a Yid never bends, and a Yid never gives up in the night. A Yid perseveres through the deepest despairs. His emunah, his faith, strengthens him for the fight. And a Yid understands that Hashem has a plan, and that's all it takes to make it through. Such powerful words for the times we're living through today. I'd like to dedicate this evening's shiur to South Africa, to our beautiful country and our absolutely magnificent community. May Hashem guide us and bring us to a time of good health, peace, and a sustainable future for all of us and our families. And please, God, we should see the beauty that our country has to offer us. And with that, we're going to begin. A Jewish man is shipwrecked on a desert island. Unfortunately, he's stuck there for years and years and years. So, a Jew makes a plan. So using whatever he could find around the island, he manages to build himself a home, and then he moves on to a grocery store. He even built himself a shul. Eventually, after a good couple of years, this Jew has made and built up an entire neighborhood on this desert island. Finally, the day arrives after many, 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 many years. He's finally rescued by a passing ship. The sailors give him the time and help him to collect all his possessions that he's acquired over the last couple of years. And they help him to say goodbye to the island forever, please God. And just before leaving, one sailor turns to him and says, "Hey, why did you build 2 synagogues?" So the man rolls his eyes and he says, "This one over here, that's my shul. That's the shul I'll never, ever step foot into." If you think about it, it is nothing short of miraculous that in the days of old, our nation, our people had just one central temple. We had one Beit HaMikdash on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This was one place, one center, one meeting point where the entire nation of Israel would gather to pray, to sing, to celebrate, to be forgiven, and to recognize that God is constantly involved in our lives. If you think about it, it is unbelievably miraculous that that's what we had in the days of old. I'm just going to ask you if anybody's comfortable to turn on their cameras. Would love to engage and see more of you. There is a very interesting Talmudic statement that goes like this. Our sages have taught us that every generation in which the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, is not rebuilt, it is considered as if it was destroyed in that generation. I'm just going to repeat that again because it's quite hectic. Every generation in which the temple was not rebuilt, it's considered as if it was destroyed in that generation. Now, how is that statement even fair? What does it even mean? How could a generation that didn't merit the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash be accused of being responsible of destroying it? Something here makes no sense. It doesn't fit together. Nothing here actually fits together, doesn't make sense, because we've had generations and generations of extraordinary tzaddikim, extraordinary righteous people, people of the highest caliber, both in their service of God and their interactions with people around them. It seems completely absurd and unfair that just because the Beit HaMikdash was not rebuilt in their generation, how could we accuse them that it was destroyed? They were responsible for destroying it in their lifetime. So what's going on over here? What does the statement actually mean? Maybe it means that the generation that will merit the building of the Beit HaMikdash in its time will in fact be a greater generation than any of its predecessors. So maybe that particular generation where the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, maybe that's going to be an extraordinarily brilliant, righteous generation. But that makes it seem like the previous generations, they were responsible for destroying it. And it doesn't fit. Nothing fits over here. It doesn't make sense. It seems absurd that generations before us that were spiritual giants, literally spiritual giants, Torah geniuses, generous souls, great human beings, they did not merit the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. But our generation today, us around today, and we're known that we are spiritually weaker. We're not as great spiritually as they were before us. How is it possible that we, please God, will merit the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash? If they could not do it, if they didn't merit, if they weren't able to pick up the pieces and put the building blocks up and get that building up, how are we supposed to do it? How we're expected to do it? And so there's a very deep and profound explanation that was shared by a great commentator known as the Sfat Emet. And he really helps to reshape our perspective of Jewish history. We often look back at history just as that, history, something that happened in the distant past. Nothing really to do with me here today, 2021, Johannesburg, South Africa, doesn't really affect me. I mean, am I really connected to my great-great-grandmother who lived in Russia 200 years ago and went through all her challenges and all her struggles and had certain issues that she had to deal with? Am I really connected to her? Or what about my great-grandfather who lived in Jerusalem under the rule of the Turks 120 years ago? Is there really any connection that I today have to him? And as unique and as special as every single one of us is, and we know that Jewish law and Torah law put so much emphasis on how unique every single person is, how special every single soul is. We know that. But as unique as each one of us are, we are not the start of a brand new book in the history of our people. Judaism views history as one long story. Every person, every birth, every page just continues the story on from the page before. And it's all these chapters, and it's all these short stories, and all these little anecdotes that come together that create this single story, which stretches all the way back from our forefather Abraham to 2021 today, Jewish life today. Our story is not a book that's compiled of lots of short stories. It's not lots of little chapters, little short stories here and there that have nothing to do with each other, but rather our story, our Jewish story, is one long novel that's still going on. Next episode is coming soon. It just keeps on growing, it keeps on coming. And so not only are we directly connected to our past, we keep the past alive through us. We live the past in the present. So when it comes to rebuilding our Beit HaMikdash, when it comes to rebuilding our temple and bringing redemption to our fractured and our broken world, the Talmud comes to explain to us that this building does not and cannot happen overnight, but rather the building of our temple will happen as a result of lots and lots and lots of work. It will happen as a result of the accumulation of all of the achievements of all of our people from the time of the destruction over 2,000 years ago until today, to this very day. Because to build a building of this magnitude, to bring in an era, this incredible era that we're so hopeful for, it's impossible for one generation. It is impossible for one group of people to do the job on their own, but rather every single generation, every single person contributes their own uniqueness, their own specialty to change the world until finally, after years and years and thousands of years, the work will be complete. So this building of this building, the rebuilding of this building, the ushering in of this era is a real work in progress. Now we believe because we actually don't have any other choice but to believe. We believe that we are the generation that will usher in the redemption. We have to believe. There's nothing else to hold on to. The world's gone manic. This is not even a South African issue anymore. The world at large has gone into chaos, confusion. It's totally crazy, the whole entire world. And so we have to believe that we are going to be the generation that will usher in the redemption. We will greet Mashiach and we will build our holy temple. But how is it possible? How? How are we actually going to succeed if other generations didn't manage to do so? We've had far greater people of higher caliber that have lived before us. If they weren't able to do it, how are you and I going to do it? So imagine somebody wants to build a big bonfire. And what do? They go, they take their axe, they chop down the wood, they find the best pieces of the best logs, the best shape and all of that. And they start to put it together and they start to build this, this pyramid that's going to be the base of the bonfire. And they even position all the firelighters in the correct place. And they even pour the kerosene over it. The problem is, when they look this way and that way, no one has a match. There's no one there who's got a matchbox that's going to start the fire. They can't even find the two rocks to rub together to create a fire. And then all of a sudden, after this massive bonfire has been built, but there's no fire lighting on it, you walk around. And there you are, you're walking to yourself, your hands are in your pockets, and you think to yourself, if they weren't able to light this fire, how in heaven's name am I going to do it? But guess what? Because in your pocket, there is a match. The matchbox, you've got it. It's inside your pocket. All you need to do is strike the match and the bonfire will literally explode. You're not working in isolation. The bonfire is not because of you alone. You didn't build the bonfire on your own, but your work is a direct continuation of the guys before you that worked tirelessly on trying to get this bonfire going. And that's our story. The blood, the sweat, and the tears of the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years is one integrated long story. It's like, imagine it like this. Imagine there's this massive vessel, this big jar that's filled one drop at a time. Now it's going to take a heck of a long time to fill up that jar, to fill up that vessel. But one drop at a time, slowly but surely, it starts filling up. So it's not that you and I are filling the jug on our own. We're not working in isolation. We are just filling a vessel, filling a jug that previous generations had filled before us, but they didn't manage to fill up, to overflow that vessel. You and I are just adding our drop of water to that massive, massive vessel called the Jewish story. And so every generation since the destruction of our temple is building the Beit HaMikdash. Every single generation continues the work of the previous generation. Every Jew is continuing to fill that vessel drop by drop, piece by piece. You and I, what really makes a Jew is that you're always in building mode. We're always working towards building a world of peace, a world of healing. That is called building and working towards the rebuilding of our Beit HaMikdash. We all have grandmothers, generations of grandmothers who lit their Shabbat candles before sunset every Friday afternoon. These were women who prayed and begged and hoped, implored and cried for a better tomorrow, for a better future. Where did all those tears go? Where did all their good deeds go to? Do you want to tell me that they just evaporated into thin air, disappeared, boom, gone, finished? What happened to that? Their tears, their actions made their way into what we call the soil of Jewish history. Their tears, their actions is what waters you and I today. That's what waters our souls. It is them. They were the ones that have given us today the strength, the power, and the capability to grow, to continue on, to blossom, and to live the lives we do today. It's the tears of all the previous generations. It's the work of all the previous generations that has given us today, in the world we live in this broken, fractured world, they've given us the courage and the resolve not to just live, but to thrive as Jewish people. On the 9th of Av in 1492, when our forefathers were literally chucked out of Spain without a penny to their name, with nothing but their clothing on their back, they didn't lose hope. But what they did, what they experienced, that went into the vessel of our history. When my great-great-grandmother cut a hole in the middle of a frozen lake in icy Russia, in the Russian winter, to be able to go to the mikveh, that act went into this vessel. When my grandparents courageously came out of Auschwitz and they took it upon themselves to rebuild their families, to rebuild their homes and to start their lives after the horrors of Auschwitz and to continue the Jewish story, that went into the vessel of our Jewish story. And on August 15th, 2005, the 9th of Av, when the residents of Gush Katif were forced to evacuate their beloved land that they had built up, that went into the vessel of Jewish history as well. None of us. There is no such a thing as a Jew that works in isolation. We keep building on the past. We are a direct connection to past generations. All we're doing in a nutshell is continuing their work. Shoshana Ovitz survived the hell of Auschwitz. She watched as her dear mother was literally ripped out of her arms, away from her, and handed over to the infamous Nazi doctor, Joseph Mengele Yamach Shema. Her father was murdered there as well. And she managed to get through it. She managed to live through Auschwitz. And after the Holocaust, she met a dear cousin of hers, Dov Ovitz, who had lost his wife and his 4 daughters in the gas chambers. They made a decision to get married. They finally settled in Haifa in Israel, where they had 2 daughters and 2 sons. Just that is a miracle of its own. 2 years ago, in 2019, Shoshana celebrated her 104th birthday. Her birthday celebration went absolutely viral world over. Her birthday request for a 104th birthday: I want all my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I want everybody to come together and celebrate my day with me at the Kotel in Jerusalem, at the Western Wall. This wasn't an easy request, but I guess when your 104-year-old grandmother asks you to do something, you fly across the globe, you drop whatever you're doing, and they came. They came in their hundreds. Approximately 400 descendants came down, rocked down onto the Western Wall platform over there, and there they were. Her oldest granddaughter, Penina, said it was the most unbelievable sight to watch. Shoshana actually sat up on a platform. They put her up on a platform. She sat there in a wheelchair, holding on to a little boy, her great-grandson's hands. And there, could you imagine, sitting up there, watching her entire family? This was her tribe. I could only imagine that as she was sitting there, what was going through her mind? It could only be that what I see in front of me, this is a celebration that symbolizes my victory, my triumph over Hitler and the Nazis, Yamach Shemam. Shoshana passed away in February this year at the age of 105, but after such a rich birthday celebration in 2019. So on January 27th, 1945, when Shoshana was eventually liberated, she must have looked like a literal skeleton covered in a bit of flesh here and there. Who would have thought in 1945 that this skeleton would go on and raise not just a magnificent family, but an incredible tribe of Torah observant people, of people that are defying Hitler on a day-to-day basis? Who would have imagined that one day in the future, my entire family would gather together at the Western Wall, this massive tribe of people? Who would have thought that in 1945? What's the secret? What was her strength? How was she able to do this? It was the sweat, the blood, and the tears of so many women before her. Her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, all the way back to our foremother Sarah. It was their tears. It was their resolve that was actually able to nurture Shoshana back to life and ensure that she blossoms, that she grew into this vibrant, beautiful, magnificent tree with hundreds and hundreds of fruits. Had Shoshana not been part of this beautiful, rich history that we're a part of, building such a legacy would not have been possible. It's illogical. It makes no sense to walk out of Auschwitz in 1945 and 75 years later to have this incredible tribe in front of you. But Shoshana is not an isolated chapter. She's not just a short little story in the book of our people. She was the continuation of the story. And she still lives on. That's the beautiful part of it. She still lives on, and her story still continues. Her legacy still moves on through her children, through her family, and through her nation, through her people. Because none of us live in isolation. When you put a coin into the pushka, into the tzedakah box, that can have a direct effect on somebody who is on oxygen in the ICU currently. And every single time a man wraps tefillin around his arm, that can have and he's sitting in South Africa, that could have a direct effect on the residents who are living in the south of Israel when rockets are bombing down on them. Every single time I choose to light Shabbat candles, go to the mikveh, say Tehillim, attend a shiur, make a bracha, make a blessing, do something holy, do something spiritual, every single one of those actions goes straight into our people's vessel, goes into the story of Jewish history, goes into that massive, massive jug, and that has ripple effects. Literally, we don't always see it, but ripple effects it has, and it can literally change lives. Every generous thought, every kind word, every kind deed, every uplifting word that you think, that you say, that you do, goes into that vessel. There is nothing that we do that is in vain. And it's drop by drop, deed by deed, word by word, mitzvah by mitzvah, that it all gets added up together until that vessel is completely full, until that vessel will literally overflow, and we will be able to usher in this era of hope, healing, tranquility, security, peace, all the things that we are currently craving. This is the secret of how we bring redemption to a broken, fractured world. And based on this, we can actually now understand quite a famous story that I'm sure all of you here are very well aware of. I'm going to go over the story, but with a slight detail that's often left out. So the year was 70 CE, Common Era. The Romans had surrounded the city of Jerusalem. Finally, on the 17th of Tammuz, they had breached the walls. They came in viciously and violently and completely and utterly destroyed our beloved city of Jerusalem, killing people in masses. And this culminated, as we know, on the 9th of Av with the burning of our Beit HaMikdash. Do you know that close to 1 million Jews were slaughtered? And those that survived, many of them were sold as slaves. By the way, just to give you context, a Jewish slave was far cheaper to buy, to purchase, than a horse. That's how many Jewish slaves were on the market in that era. The vessels of our temple, the holy vessels of our Beit HaMikdash, were taken down to Rome, and they were displayed there in Rome as a sign of victory. They were celebrating their triumph over the Jewish nation. But when we look into the Gemara actually focuses on one story that caused the destruction, the downfall, the despair of our nation. And it's within the story that the Talmud focuses on a small, seemingly very insignificant detail. And we're going to go through it now. The story is so well known. There was a wealthy Jew living in Jerusalem, and he wanted to throw a real party. I'm talking about like a pre-COVID bash. And he had a very good friend by the name of Kamsa and a real enemy by the name of Bar Kamsa. Well, the male 2,000 years ago really wasn't great. The male was just as problematic as it is today. And what did he do? He sent his messenger out to invite his very best friend Kamsa. But the messenger got confused. And by accident, what does he do? He invites the enemy, Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa receives the invitation and he thinks to himself, wow, this is really big of my enemy. He really wants to reach out. He really wants to make shalom, peace with me. You know what? I'm going to respond. I'm going to respond to him. I'll attend his party. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to move forward and leave the past behind us and really make up and move forward in life. At the party, the host is walking around, he's greeting all of his guests, and suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he notices Bar Kamsa sitting over there. He runs over to him and screams at him, what are you doing here? Get out of my party immediately. And we know that Bar Kamsa became red, embarrassed, and says to him, please, I'm begging you. I got an invitation. I'm here already. I won't cost you a cent. I will pay you for everything that I eat and drink. Just let me stay. The host, absolutely not an option. Get out of my party. Please, I'll pay for half of your party. Half your party I'll pay for. Get out. I don't want you here. Please, I'll pay for the full party. The entire evening won't cost you a cent. Host says, no, I'm not interested. Get out of here. I guess maybe hosting parties in those days was far cheaper than it is today, because I guess if anybody today would get such an offer of paying for the whole party, they probably would accept to have the enemy stay at their party and have all costs covered. But the host refuses a penny. He literally grabs him and he throws him, he chucks him out of his party. Bar Kamsa is furious. You could imagine that he's furious. He's embarrassed. He's ashamed. And he thinks to himself, all the rabbis were sitting and watching this event unfold. Clearly, they all agreed with the host's behavior, because not one of them came to my aid. Not one of them came to help me out. And he makes up his mind there and then that he's going to go over to the Roman emperor and inform the Roman emperor that the Jews are plotting a rebellion against him. And that's exactly what he does. The Roman emperor says, a rebellion against me? What do you mean? He says, I'll prove it to you. We know that Gentiles are allowed to offer sacrifices in the Beit HaMikdash. Send an animal. I'll take it down with me. Send an animal to be offered as a sacrifice. If the Jews bring up your animal, great. I'm wrong, no rebellion in place. But if they refuse to bring up your animal as a sacrifice, that will be proof to you that they are plotting this rebellion. The emperor agrees, I've got nothing to lose. What does he do? He sends the most beautiful calf down to Jerusalem to be the sacrifice. But on the way down to Jerusalem, Bar Kamsa, very sneakily, very cunningly, slyly, makes a blemish on the lip of the calf, on the upper lip of the calf. He was very careful enough to make a scratch that, according to halacha, would disqualify this calf from being brought up as a korban, as a sacrifice, but not enough of a scar to be called a blemish for the Gentile people. The calf arrives in the temple. He tells them this is from the Roman emperor. The rabbis see it and they know we have to bring this animal up. We don't have a choice. We've got to be able to keep the peace going between the Roman emperor and the Jewish people, despite the fact that according to halacha, the calf has a blemish. We've got to go through, we've got to bring it up just to keep the peace going. But a certain sage by the name of Zechariah ben Avkulas, he says, no way, not a chance. That's not okay. You can't bring up a blemished animal. People will then think that bringing up a blemished animal is fine, is okay to do. It's kosher to bring up a blemished animal as a sacrifice. No way, you cannot do that. So the rabbis agreed, okay, we can't bring up the animal because it would go against halacha, no problem. But we have no choice then but to have Bar Kamsa killed. Why? Because if we don't have him killed, he's going to go back to the Roman emperor. He'll inform the Roman emperor that we didn't use his calf as a sacrifice. And who knows the anger that will unleash? Who knows what the Roman emperor will do to us? In halacha, Bar Kamsa would be called a rodef, somebody who is actively after the life of somebody else, in this case, the life of the Jewish nation at large. Zechariah ben Avkulas says again, bad idea, guys, cut it out. You cannot go ahead with that idea. You can't kill somebody because he blemished the animal. First of all, you don't know that he blemished the animal. And second of all, you can't have him killed. Can't do that. And so nothing was done. The animal was not brought up as a calf. Bar Kamsa was not killed. The Roman emperor heard that his calf wasn't used. He immediately dispatches his Roman army, sends them down to Jerusalem, and the rest is history. And we know what happens. 2 generations later, the famous Rabbi Yochanan, who is the editor of the Jerusalem Talmud, wrote like this. He writes, it was the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulas, of this sage. It was the humility of Zechariah that destroyed our home, burnt our temple, and exiled us out of our land. Now, let me ask you, is that not the most unfair sentence, accusation you have ever heard? How crazy does the statement sound? Let's go back. The host that embarrassed the rich man that made the party and threw out and embarrassed Bar Kamsa, chucked him out of his party. No, he's not to blame. He's fine. The rabbis who were sitting at the party that didn't bother to intervene, didn't bother to stand up, to aid and help Bar Kamsa, no, they're not to blame. Bar Kamsa, who himself went to the Roman emperor, lied to him, blemished the animal, came down and reinformed to the emperor what was happening by the Jewish people. No, he's not to blame. Who's to blame according to the Talmud? The great sage, Zechariah ben Avkulas, who all he was doing was acting according to halacha. He's to blame for the destruction of our second temple. He's to blame for the blood, the terror, the atrocities that happened 2,000 years ago. He is to blame for the fact that you and I are here in exile today, in chaos and confusion today. What's going on over here? And what does Rabbi Yochanan actually mean when he says it was the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulas? How are we blaming his humility? First of all, what about the story actually shows his humility? I mean, you want to tell me he was too frum, too fanatic, too extreme? Yeah, that makes sense. You want to say he was God-fearing? Fine, good. You want to say that he was scared of the masses, scared of what other people would think? Fine. But humble? Where in the story do you see any form of humility of this sage, Zechariah ben Avkulas, who is accused of bringing the atrocities of 2,000 years ago onto the Jewish people? So let me ask you, Zechariah ben Avkulas, he wasn't actually acting in unison. He represented all of the people that were living in that era. They all suffered from the very same illness, the very same problem. They all suffered from this sort of humility that the Talmud is blaming Zechariah ben Avkulas of having. Let me ask you, if you were standing 2,000 years ago in the temple, and this guy Bar Kamsa arrives with this animal that has this blemish on its lip, right? You know it's from the Roman emperor, and you know that this individual, this guy Bar Kamsa, is going to go back to Rome. He is going to inform the Roman emperor that you did not bring up the sacrifice because it had a blemish on it, right? So he's going to let the emperor know that the Jewish people rejected his sacrifice. Now, any common person, any normal person, you don't have to be a great sage, any person has enough common sense to know that this ain't going to end good. This is not going to have a very happy ending, because the emperor will seek revenge. He's going to probably look to destroy the temple, look to destroy the Jewish people. So what would you do? Of course, you would have this individual put to death. He is halachically called a rodef, somebody who is after the lives of another person, in this case, the entire people. But Zechariah ben Avkulas, he worried that the people wouldn't understand why Bar Kamsa was sentenced to death. He worried that people would ask, but why did he deserve the death penalty? Why were you so harsh on him? Why did you do what you did? And so Zechariah was worried what people would think. And so what? As one of the greatest sages of his time, who had the ability to make such decisions, he was the guy that was in a position of authority. He should never have thought twice over here. But what was the problem? His humility got in the way. He didn't see himself as important enough to make such a rash and tough decision. He didn't regard himself as actually having a leg to stand on. He didn't see himself as a real halachic authority to make this drastic decision and stop a traitor in Israel in his tracks. The big issue here was that he was too humble. He didn't realize that it was his decision, his action, his swiftness that could have changed the entire course of Jewish history. Because had he killed Bar Kamsa and the Roman emperor would not have been informed, who knows where history would have taken us from there. And this actually was the underlying issue of the Jewish people in that era. The rabbis and all the important officials that were at that rich man's party, they didn't protest. They didn't get up and try and stop the host from throwing Bar Kamsa out of the party. Who are we to intervene? Will my opinion, will what I think really make any difference here? This is not my party. This is not my issue. It's the rich man's party. And his sworn enemies, yeah. So how are we to judge what's going on over here? Let him figure this out on his own. It's really none of our business. Maybe he'll even throw us out of the party if we try get involved and try to intervene. This is what brings destruction to Jerusalem. When people collectively don't realize their self-worth, when people don't understand how much of an effect they have on their environment. When individuals don't comprehend the impact that their thoughts, that their words, that their acts have on their surroundings, and they don't do anything, and they stop themselves there, that is the beginning of destruction. Redemption, on the other hand, will come about when you and I and everybody else understands that I make a tremendous difference in this world. That whatever I do, down to the smallest, tiniest act, can actually tip the scale and make the biggest difference and have the biggest impact on someone, somewhere, someday. When I can comprehend that anything I do, that anything I say goes directly into that Jewish vase, that Jewish jug, that Jewish vessel, into the Jewish story, it could actually be my act, my little tiny act. I'm not asking for any huge, massive things to happen over here. It could be my little tiny act that could cause this vessel to overflow. It could be my little thought, my little word that could literally bring about the redemption. And so now we can truly appreciate the powerful words of the Talmud, going back to the beginning. What kind of generation is the Talmud referring to when it says that if the Beit HaMikdash was not built in their day, it's like it was destroyed in their day, destroyed in their generation? What does that mean? So we now know that building the Beit HaMikdash doesn't happen overnight. It's a work in progress from generation to generation to generation. Midor ledor, that's what it is. We each build on the generation before us. We each have to do my little small part to heal the world, to build it through positivity, through goodness, through kindness, to make this place a world where God will feel comfortable and God will feel at home. And he'll feel at home where there's positive vibes and positive energy. So what does the Talmud mean? Which generation is actually responsible for destroying the temple? It's the generation that gives up on their historic mission. It's the generation that chooses not to focus on the past, not to focus on the future, not to care, not to add anything of value, not to add to the good that's already been achieved until now. It's the generation that wants out, to get off this train that's traveling from darkness to light, to get off the train that's traveling from brokenness to wholeness. It's the generation that says, I am no longer part of the Jewish story. I want out. Such a generation causes a gap in the chain, a hole in the chain, a stop in the train tracks, not allowing the train to reach its ultimate destination, which is a world of hope, peace, love, healing, and tranquility. Such a generation that doesn't continue building is accused of actually destroying the Beit HaMikdash, destroying the temple. A generation which does not contribute to the building project that we're all on because they don't realize their self-worth, they don't realize their value, they don't realize what an effect they can have on the world. In fact, they minimize how effective their actions are on society. They don't realize how painful, detrimental, and destructive their apathy, their passivity is, right? Such a generation would be guilty of destroying our holy temple because they're as humble as the era of Zechariah ben Avkulas. They don't take that stand. They don't make their mark. They don't make a difference. And we may not realize immediately what that difference could be. I just want to share with you a magnificent story that I heard in the last couple of days. In fact, I heard it from Rabbi Roddel from Chabad of Norwood. So everything's true because it's first-hand story. He tells the story how a young girl, an 8-year-old girl from King David Linksfield, was having a birthday party. Her parents asked her, what do you want? And amazingly, this girl turns and says, I don't need anything. Let's rather ask people to donate blankets and whatever, all those kind of things to an animal shelter. And her parents took that idea a step further. And her parents said, well, let's throw your birthday party in an animal shelter. Well, they couldn't find any shelter that would host this party. They looked far and wide, but nobody was able to host this party. Anyways, finally, they found a shelter really far out. I think it was near Krugersdorp. And one of the people there, his name was Jack. He said, no problem, happy to host this birthday party as a once-off. At the party, the family began chatting to this guy, Jack, and they realized they had a lot in common. Animal lovers, lots going on. In fact, Jack even told them that his family was Jewish. He grew up in a very distant community in Port Elizabeth. He had no idea that he was Jewish, wasn't raised or brought up in a Jewish way at all, but he does know that he's Jewish. And that was the story. A couple of months later, it was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and this family was back at shul at Chabad of Norwood. And there was a national campaign in South Africa to try and get as many menorahs as possible for Hanukkah to as many families. The idea was that every single family in South Africa should own a menorah for Hanukkah. And Rabbi Rodel spoke about this in shul. And the little girl, the 9-year-old girl now, turns to her parents and she says, let's take this menorah and give it to Jack. Maybe he doesn't have a menorah. Maybe he doesn't know what Hanukkah is. Well, the family agreed and they made the long trip down to the shelter. And there they gave this menorah to Jack. They chatted to him about Hanukkah. And Jack actually said to them, this will be the very first time in my life that I'll ever be celebrating Hanukkah. And they moved on. Well, life for Jack took a literal downwards turn. Jack lost his job. His wife and his daughter died in a car accident. He was homeless. He was out of a job. His parents had passed away. He had lost contact with everybody. He literally had nothing left to his name. In fact, there was no way out. The only way out was suicide. He had even found that specific tree where he was going to hang his body. And suddenly, as he was contemplating this, he remembered this particular family, that if they drove all the way here to give me a menorah for Hanukkah, maybe these people are filled with kindness. Maybe somehow they could help me. And he gives them a call. And as soon as they hear what Jack is going through, this family immediately calls Rabbi Rodel from Chabad of Norwood. He makes contact with Jack, stops Jack in his tracks, tells him, don't do anything, I'll be there immediately, drops whatever he has and rushes over to him. And to cut a long story short, he was able to look after him, not only physically, and make sure that he had a home and food and loving people around him, but they gave him that emotional support, and they actually were able to bring him back to life. Here's another magnificent story, how this family had no idea what taking a menorah to a person who lived further out of town could do. They literally saved his life. This is the Jewish story. This is what it means that every act that we do has such a ripple effect. In this case, they saw directly what the ripple effect is. Not always are we lucky enough to see that ripple effect. Tomorrow night, Shabbos, is a very unique and special Shabbos. We call it Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbos of vision. And we're taught that every single soul, every Jewish soul, no matter your level of observance, no matter what you believe or what you don't believe, every single Jewish soul receives a vision of the third Beit HaMikdash, the third temple on this Shabbos. We get to see spiritually what the future holds for us. And as we go into Shabbos Chazon, as we approach Tisha B'Av on Sunday, let's go head on, headstrong into building mode. Let's remember how valuable every act in our day is, how cherished every single word that we say could be. The smallest thing can have the most incredible ripple effect on our families, on our communities, on our country, which so desperately needs it now, and on the rest of the world. Let's ensure that we do not suffer from the very same issue that Zechariah ben Avkulas and his generation suffered from. Let's not think that we're so humble that we can't do more, that my actions won't count, that who am I to do whatever it is. We can and we must use our voices positively. We can and we must act in any way that we possibly can to bring more goodness, more positivity, and more kindness to this world. And we so desperately need it today more than ever before. Let us build on the shoulders of the generations before us, continuing on our rich Jewish story, our incredible Jewish story, which logically makes no sense. because Shoshana Ovitz should never have sat at the kotel at the age of 104 with over 400 descendants. But how lucky we are, Ashreinu, how fortunate we are. We do not live in unison. We do not work alone. We are literally standing on the shoulders of generations before us. Giants of generations, giants and giants, and we are the little midgets standing up on top. Let's continue their legacy. Let's continue our Jewish story so that our Jewish vessel, our jug, can actually finally overflow. And you and I together can start a brand new chapter titled Redemption, Peace, Togetherness, Health, Chavashaft, Safety, and Security. Thank you for joining. I wish you a wonderful evening, a Shabbat Shalom, an easy fast. And please God, may we be able to say this Tisha B'Av, Chag Sameach, Gut Yontiv.